Welcome to the National Council of Supervisors of Mathematics, NCSM, Leadership in Mathematics podcast. NCSM is an organization supporting mathematics education leadership at the school, district, college, university, state, province, and national levels. Its membership constitutes an international force collaborating to achieve excellence in mathematics education. Be sure to visit the NCSM website at mathedleadership.org. Welcome to Episode 29 in the series of podcasts recorded at the NCSM annual meetings. This session, titled Knowing and Modeling Prime Equity Leadership, was recorded on April 20th, 2009, and was presented by Linda Fulmore, NCSM Second Vice President, and Timothy Kanold, NCSM President. In this interactive session, participants were provided with an opportunity to develop understanding of the equity principle leadership actions as described in Prime. Participants used self-assessment tools to connect the equity actions into the context of their workplace. Be sure to tune in to future episodes of the NCSM Leadership in Mathematics podcasts.
Linda, if you know Linda from Fulmore. The two of us are going to work together. Linda and I actually have been working together in a couple of more urban type districts for the last few years. Phoenix Union and Grossmont Union in eastern San Diego County, and a few other places up on the south side of Chicago. So in our work together, we had a chance to actually try to take some of what's in Prime and begin to really unfold the equity issues that are in there and the equity principle and how do we really make it work. And what we'd like to do today, because of the nature, and I didn't say it, but thank you too for just you got to be tired by now. I'm tired. So we'll just do the best we can, get our energy up for a little bit, focused on equity. And I want to tell you that when we went to write the document and work on it, I will tell you that I didn't mention that this morning. But we were really thinking through the framework and what would be the best way to kind of attack the framework. And early on it was clear we wanted to focus it on 4 principles, right? So those principles, of course, make sense to say, how do we lead teaching and learning? How do we really get that to go well? How do we lead curriculum? And how do we lead assessment? And for us, we felt like the common thread and theme for the whole document had to be, though, about how do we lead for equity? Or how do we begin to erase inequities? And really begin to address that as a central principle and issue. So that's why it's the first one in the document, and one of the ones that plays an essential theme throughout the rest of the document. And my own personal experiences, I have to tell you, I think we're kind of attacking the curriculum issue pretty well, but the assessment inequities that are created, and Katie kind of talked about it a little bit this morning, but it has a lot of equity sense to it, as does the lesson planning for instruction. So we're going to only focus on one little part of the equity in our work, and then hopefully motivate you to want to learn about more. Having said that, when we went to put the document together initially, our working draft for a long time, in the document you'll see that besides these principles are these indicators, and there's 12 of them, for us as leaders. But then there's these bullets that are knowledge and skills, we call them. So the initial acronym for the document was PRIKS. Principles, indicators, knowledge, and skills. I know. And it was the first time I remember, we were working with the working committee, and Linda was on the committee. I remember sending out a memo to the writing committee about the PRIKS, all in capital letters, and I was like, I think we need to change it. Probably isn't going to work well nationally. So anyway, if we came out to be Prime, which was just so much better. And we're finding a lot of success in sort of using it as a professional development framework as we work with teachers. One of the things that I think you probably know is that the document really takes a hard look at what we have to do to ensure teachers do certain things. Katie talked this morning about the intentionality in schools where there really seems to be good results, that the teachers have an intentional sort of practice, and there's not a lot of looseness about that, about what we're going to commit to. People like Bob Marzano and others call that defined autonomy. As teachers, we have autonomy to do things, but it's defined around certain non-negotiable issues. And unless you do that, then inequities start to become pervasive in the school culture. So it's kind of, there's this sort of sense of how do we then provide both the support teachers need to have the right knowledge, but also the pressure to move there if they're not there. You know, and kind of how do we do that well, and what does that look like? So we're going to attack that sort of from the equity side of it, and hopefully have a chance to actually experience it a little bit during this session. One of the things too that I wanted to be really clear about is that as we thought about the, you know, what is equity and how do we actually apply this from an equity framework, an equity lens, for us there were certain fundamental givens, non-negotiables, that if you don't want to be about these things, then one, you probably shouldn't even be in this room, but two, certainly don't work for me or with me. Because these are going to be the things that we're going to just die for. You know, these are going to be the things that we're going to be passionate about. And it's spelled out pretty clearly in the document, actually, on pages 2 and 3 of the document, which, unless you have the document with you, it's not part of the handout we gave you. But here, the idea that we must be about success for every child achieving at the levels that we want. And then, of course, you can see that begins to permeate in equity thought. We must be about, remember this morning, if you're there at the opening session, I talked about passion, truth, and action. It's kind of what you see in these assumptions, isn't it? Because there's sort of the truth comes from the fact that the research affirms it for us, and it's grounded in a body of research literature. In other words, we didn't make this stuff up. You know, everything that's in this handout we just gave you is research affirmed, guaranteed to work. Just go do it. You know, because in the simple sense of our own leadership, just to give you a very simple idea, we know through a variety of studies that if teachers would just lesson plan for the simple act of some physical activity during a classroom period or the time of instruction for an elementary school math moment, for there to be just a little bit of physical activity, student performance on average in math goes up 14%, more than one standard deviation. And yet, we have lots and lots of teachers who are planning math lessons in which there is no physical activity. And I'm like, why not? You know, who's telling them differently? It's an interesting, and then we also though have lots of classrooms where there is physical activity, some of yours probably. And so now there goes inequity. We just created tremendous inequity that now children are learning through one simple little act. Some are choosing to do it, some are not choosing to do it. And so so equity kind of like, you know, plays itself in many, many different ways. And anyway, and then the third one that is sort of a fundamental aspect of the document, if you are not familiar with it, is called Stage 2 Leadership, and deals with how we actually get teachers to collaborate with one another in a collegial interchange, and meaning that as leaders in our schools, even this equity discussion cannot be a discussion in isolation from one another. It has to be a discussion that we have collaboratively and together, and as we begin to kind of look at those rules. So keep those things in mind as we work through the equity document. And then every one of the 4 principles has these 3 sort of stages of leadership. Stage 1 of ourself. For example, that little fact I just gave you about Marzano's research, you might not have known. If it's not in your own knowledge base, how are you going to teach it to others? If you don't have it, if you don't even know where to go cite it, if you don't, you know, if you've read Marzano's book on the art and science of teaching, you know this. But if you haven't, you don't know it. Or you might know it, and you just didn't have research to affirm it. But either way, it's kind of we have to know and model it ourselves. And then there's kind of the collaborate and implement stage where we really help others that we're leading and influencing to do it. And then sort of we become advocates for it. So those themes kind of weave themselves through Prime. On these 2 pages, you're going to be able to read some of our sense of this issue, of the equity issue. And what I'd like you to do at your tables, and if you're sitting by yourself, if you don't mind moving to a table that has someone there before you're done, what I'd like you to do is to read the page and just highlight some passages that hit you. You're all really smart. I mean, you're here and you're into this and you care about it, you're passionate. So, you know, there's stuff there that's just going to resonate. There might even be a few things you're going, and it doesn't make sense to me, or I don't agree with it. But highlight things that kind of make sense. And then round robin around your table, which means everyone gets a chance to speak. So somebody start and make sure everyone gets a voice, okay? And to record any additional thoughts that your table might have. And what I'd like you to try to do as you're doing that is some big phrases or words will emerge as it applies to equity and kind of your understanding of equity. So we're going to use the reading to kind of just help us sort of think about it, create a anticipatory set, and then actually use your own background and knowledge to talk a little bit more about it. And we'd like your table to come up with 12 to 15 words that actually defines equity. And good luck with this because it's like almost an impossible task. But you can even use a picture if you want. If some of you are more visual, draw a picture but no more than 12 or 15 words. That actually, in your sense, captures the essence of what we mean when we say, let's have a session on equity and access in mathematics. What would be you've got 15 seconds to tell the story. What would you write down and tell somebody, this is what we're about? Okay? So hopefully that'll emerge. It'll give you a little bit of time to work on it. We'll come around and kind of listen in or share or help or whatever. And then we'll come back together and see what we have. All right. Good luck.
That's lowering my expectations. So they don't really get what to do with that term.
Okay. All right.
That's the big.
Sorry, I'm going to ask for your attention back up front. Now, here's what's interesting about this. So, in 15 minutes here, we asked you to do what we spent like 6 months trying to just sort of think through. So, appreciate that. But why don't you get you involved in it just a little bit? If you would actually look on page 9, which is the front page, we pretty much say there, here's what we think it is. If we're going to address leadership issues as it applies to equity, then it has to center discussions around these 3 things. Number 1, that every teacher will address gaps in mathematics achievement expectations. That there is this sense of understanding what and where and how the gaps are happening, and we're going to have a plan to work on it. And every teacher will own that. 2, that every teacher will provide access to relevant and meaningful mathematics experiences. And that we will deny barriers from access as well. Students being able to experience our most rigorous curriculum. But there's this sense here, this is more about understanding who the children are walking into our classrooms. That mathematics doesn't just sell itself. We have to have a sense of, I've often thought math needs to act like an elective. We know you have to take it, but we're going to make you think like you could actually have the option to not take it next year if you didn't want to. So we're going to have to do everything we can to want you to stay. It would be good. And then the third element, the third indicator is that every teacher will work interdependently in a collaborative learning community to erase inequity. So therefore, there is no more, ever again, teachers working in isolation, which causes all forms of inequity, that they must work collaboratively with one another. And we have to begin to set up those structures. Because of our time, we're only going to focus on the very first one here. We're going to take a minute. We're just going to unfold the first indicator and work with you on that, and we'll see how that goes. And then we've just got a few things to wrap up with at the end. So, Linda, it's all you.
All right, just a couple of things before we start looking at that first indicator. Many times we have quite a bit of discussion about the achievement gap. And some new research is coming out talking us to perhaps talk more about the opportunity gap. And so we've just put a few things up there so that you can differentiate between the two, because achievement gap is usually a mindset of focusing on the students, what they don't know, their parental background, the SES, and so forth. Whereas opportunity is really putting the focus on the adults. And I think you as leaders, as you're working with teachers, that's where the focus ought to be. If you heard Katie this morning, she was right on target with that. So we need to get rid of the negative talk. And let's focus on the adults. Let's roll up our sleeves and see what we can do to make a difference for our kids. And also in our document, you're going to see the term access a lot. And I just want to say a few things about that. we talk about having equity and access. Access means students have an opportunity to participate in. But what are the outcomes as a result of that? And Rocher Gutierrez has some recent research, and she says, okay, if kids are in a class that we want them to be in, learning a subject that we feel is important for them, are they participating in it, or are they totally confused about what's going on? What are the course-taking patterns then? Are they moving up in the pipeline, continuing to take higher level courses after that, or are they having to repeat the same course that they were in? Is real mathematics learning going on? Are they actually prepared for the next grade, the next course or college? And hopefully there's some interest in mathematics going into a mathematics related field. So as leaders, we need to keep that in mind. We need to have the discussions about that with our colleagues. So we are providing access, but what is the result? What are the outcomes that we're looking for? Some things we can measure, and perhaps some things we cannot, but those things that we can measure, I think we should. All right, so if you would look on page 12 of your document, you see the first indicator there that Tim has already read to you. Every teacher addresses gaps in mathematics achievement expectations for all students. So, just what does that mean? We're going to address it. What does it mean to address it as a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 learner? As a stage 1 learner, as you know, what do I need to know about that as stage 2? How am I going to help my colleagues get there? So what we're going to do right now is just focus on stage 1. And the knowledge and skills are identify and analyze student achievement data for various populations, develop and apply knowledge about how to meet the diverse needs of all student populations, and provide specific attention to those students farthest from expected standards of achievement. So I have some questions for you. And these questions relate to all 3 of those. Sort of, the first one relates to the first knowledge and skills item and so forth and so on. So the first question is, and you're going to have a discussion around these, what disaggregated data, so think about this, what disaggregated data are you collecting at your school or district, and how are you and your teachers engaged in the data? What are you doing with it? Are you writing some SMART goals? Are you tracking it? Are you looking at trends? But the bigger part is, what is the data that you're actually collecting? The second one, what teacher actions contribute to the differentiating opportunities in classrooms? From what you observe, from what you know, what are those teacher actions that are contributing to the differentiating opportunities? And the third one, who are the students in your school, in your district, furthest from proficiency? What more do you and your teachers need to learn in order to help these students? And actually, how can research help us? That's really for all of these, but how can research help us? So what I'd like for you to do now is to pick one question, and if you think you've channeled through that, you'll pick another, but just pick one question at your table and start just jotting down some things pertaining to one of those questions. And we'll have about 5 minutes in which to do that, okay? Okay, if you can bring your conversations to a close, please. I'm sure you've just had some great ideas and some great discussion, but looking at the first question, it really was a focus on data. And so these are just some ideas of from a prime perspective and from an NCSM perspective, the kind of data we feel that you need to be tracking. And this is not at the end of the list, but we feel like this is a good beginning. So if you're in a school that gives D's and F's for certain mathematics courses, we feel that you need to be tracking that, the percentage of students getting D's and F's by teacher and by course. So the numbers of D's and F's, let's say in 8th grade algebra, or if there's an 8th grade intro algebra, separate course, or general math, whatever the case might be, the numbers of D's and F's for the course and also by teachers. As leaders, you need to have that information. Or another way to look at the percentage of students who are at advanced or proficiency levels by teacher, by course, or by grade level. And then students who end up failing the course, we need to know percentages by course and also by teacher. Failing by the end of the semester, if that's the end of your grading period, or at the beginning of the year. And then you need to look at your subpopulation. So you need to know the demographics of your schools and districts. And then for those students who are not achieving, what demographic group are they coming from? What are the percentages there? We feel it's important for you to have that information. So when we say, oh, all of our kids are doing better, they all tested better this year, yay. But within your populations, how much did each group improve? And probably some groups improved more so than others. So we really, we can celebrate on the one end, but on the other end, we have to look to see those students who didn't celebrate or who didn't achieve as much, and just pay very close attention to that. And then also look at state end of course and your unit data as well, unit assessments. For question number 2, what is it that teachers are doing that perhaps do not provide opportunities, or what is it teachers may not know? Things like non-uniform assessments, how much do they know about formative assessments, checking for understanding every day, inconsistencies in grading. So for instance, 2 teachers teaching the same course, do they have the same grading policy? Are they taking off the same number of points? Are they per question? Is it a question that's a 1-point question, but they're making it worth 10 points and then taking off the whole 10 points if it's wrong? Looking into teacher biases and perceptions, ineffective instruction, lack of planning, lack of student engagement, varying the cognitive demand of the task. These are just some of the things that you may have said that we feel are very important in looking at why some students have different types of opportunities. These could be the things that the students are not having the opportunities in. And then the last thing, what students who are not achieving, what do we know about those students? What more do we need to understand? And this gets back to our stage 1 learning, where perhaps we just need to read or go to conferences or network to find out more. For example, culture. We need to know that literature. We need to be aware of that there is literature that has some relationships between knowledge of culture and student achievement. Also in special education, I find that mathematics teachers really need to know more about special education and approach it from a positive perspective. And yes, we can make a difference for those students, as opposed to, no, we really wish we didn't have those students in our classroom. English language learners, a plethora of literature on social justice issues and learning, gender bias, social class in education, racial background in education. As leaders, we need to become more knowledgeable about these things so that we can share these issues with our teachers. And I would just like to close my part by saying that approaching equity and addressing equity is a little bit different sometimes than approaching curriculum and instruction and assessment. Approaching and addressing equity can be a little more reflective, more emotional. Sometimes it brings up some things with people. But as leaders, we have to keep working on finding our comfort zone in those areas where we can, so we can address it. And I would encourage you to address it and give it the same time that you give curriculum instruction and assessment and all the other things that you spend time talking with your folks. Okay.
All right, so it's interesting, isn't it? In fact, just to give you one example of how we may not even be aware of our own cultural biases that come into it. So I'm in my, 7th or 8th year. In my school, I was the division director for math and science, which is kind of like a department chair, 612 for math and science, and in my district. And we started having a lot of unintended prejudice against our sort of a new wave of students that were coming into our school. And they were Russian Jewish immigrants. And within about 2 years, there was sort of a mindset among our own faculty, especially in mathematics, about Russian Jewish kids cheat. Yeah. So pretty much, no one wanted them in their classes because they cheat. You got to watch them every minute, watch what they're doing. They're going to cheat. They're going to. Well, one of the things that we found out was that a lot of the kids that were coming in, this influx of immigrants for us, that there is this expectation in their schools to actually work together on tests. Yeah. So our cultural mindset wasn't quite, and it took us, we actually had to do some actual training of ourselves in order to better understand. We brought some parents in the community to talk to us about that. And that's a great example, to sort of understand, wow, yeah, that's right, we're having some issues here just because of a certain culture or class of kids that we didn't quite understand. The other biggest thing, too, I think that creates a bias here is the fact that mainstream classroom teachers tend to think the ELL kids are someone else's problem, the special ed kids are someone else's problem. That's why we send them there, to get help. But there are students. And so in more equitable models, what you'll see is this sort of kind of inclusivity of ELL and special ed teachers working with the team of math teachers in order to solve problems together, not like kind of we're separated in that work. I want to bring up just a couple of things before we're finished. And one of the things is to the second indicator that we didn't have time to really get into much today, and even here, we only just took a flush to it. Like how did we make this really go after and attack these things with the teachers, right? And indicator one. But indicator two really is, relevance and meaning, a culturally relevant curriculum. And quite honestly, that is so difficult to do in our discipline, to make slope culturally relevant. But we all have to learn it, and so how do we learn it in a way that creates understanding and it matters is a difficult question. And then the third indicator, 3, that you see in the document, is that if you were going to take a stand for the rest of your life as a mathematics education leader that is going to influence those you lead away or into equity and away from inequity, then teacher isolation cannot rule the day, and the entitlement that I have the right to do that cannot rule the day. And I'll bring up what I said since you brought that up. Thank you. Most recently in a message I gave, I talked about the fact that teachers are not self-employed. They act like they are. My curriculum, my day, my classroom, my time. I'll decide how many minutes I want to put on. I'll decide how much depth I'm going to get. All those inequities that Katie started talking about this morning, because we feel like we're entitled to make all those decisions on our own. And the reality is it's the most damaging thing that can happen. And so the third indicator in the equity part of the framework says, can't do it. We must remove and attack the teacher privilege of isolation that exists in our country. And in fact, that best practice in equitable student learning experiences trumps the student inequities created by teacher isolation, autonomy, and failure to plan. And I want you to use that. It trumps it. Well, what about my individual? It doesn't matter. If we have here's the best example I can give quickly. So we have a 7th grade daughter. And last year, she's in 6th grade, and it's happened to be a science example. Just bear with me. And she does this unbelievable, incredible, higher order, very deep, conceptually developed science project. Takes her 4 weeks. It's a 4-week project. She happens to do it because in her particular school, K6 is the elementary school, and her 6th grade teacher loves science. Not too crazy about math, but he loves science. She has this great project. And it's unbelievable. And I actually went in and saw our teacher, and I said, this was great. I love the way you structured it. You gave them enough, kind of structure around it so that they knew what to do, but you allowed them to really create and delve, your probing questions were incredible, great project. And I said, and I just asked a very innocent thing. I said, so are the other 6th grade teachers doing this project? He said, well, no, this is my project. And I said, well, let me ask you differently. Are the other 6th grade teachers at least doing something that will help their students achieve the same level of science outcomes that your students got because you did this project? Now, I had to repeat that a few times. He didn't know what I was asking. And I did, and he said, well, no, they don't really do science. I said, well, that's a problem. Why should you be creating inequity because you're doing these great things and their kids don't get to experience those same great things, and they're all going on to the same 7th grade junior high next year? And I said, you know what, we need to talk to your principal. Yeah. So we went in, we talked to his principal. I said, you got a problem here. I said, and the answer isn't that this guy stops doing the great project. The answer is these two start doing the great project. And if they don't know how, he'll teach them how. He has to teach them how. They will have to work together to figure it out. I don't care if you think that's your private project and your pet thing. It doesn't matter. It's what's best about all kids, for all kids. That trumps your desire to have your own little special pet science project. And he was really glad. My daughter, by the way, is gone in 7th grade. But so I want you to just keep that in mind, that when you tolerate and allow every teacher to be making their own decision in a course or grade level, you are tolerating inequities in student rigor and experience to begin to just widen the gaps. So I want to really encourage you to look deeply into this particular aspect of equity and see how it plays out in your own leadership voice, and use the document as a professional development tool to support your belief in this and all the research that comes with it. What we'd like you to do is just think about 2 things. Number 1, begin to really get a handle yourself on kind of like you're an NCSM member. If Prime's kind of like our guiding document, what is Prime? How would you tell somebody? Like if you got in an elevator with like a stranger, like I did, okay, I'm saying at the Renaissance, anybody saying at the Renaissance? Yeah, okay. So I got in an elevator in the Renaissance on Saturday night because we were here early for the board meeting. And there were these 2 strange people, a father and daughter in the elevator. And I said, can I tell you about what my organization does? Like, they'd really be interested, but they were here for an engineering conference, so there you go. They were somewhat interested. But if you got in an elevator, what would you tell people? Like, what really is this about, based on what you're now, as you begin to play with it and get to know it? And what we'd like to do, how many have actually done some things with Prime in the past year? All right, well, if you wouldn't mind, we'd like to know what that is. We're trying to collect your stories and kind of some of the things that are going on. So you're getting a handout here that asks some questions where you can help us kind of have a needs assessment. And one of the questions there even asks, what can we do? Because, for example, we have now put together 4 3-hour PowerPoint presentations for each of the 4 principles. We put together an overview presentation. We're putting together support materials, and we're going to post them online as a member benefit. What we want to know from you, though, is what would you want? Like in the work you're doing, what kinds of PD tools could we put up that would be valuable to you? You know, we couldn't really get into professional development tools today with you. That wasn't, it's not the nature of it. But we'd like to know. We'd like to, one of the things we're interested in trying to do is provide support for you to do what your work is. So even if you can't connect it to Prime, trust me, I could connect it to Prime somehow. So even if you couldn't quite, like say, man, it'd be great if you guys had something like this on the web that we could get. Or some kind of professional development tool in this area, because I've been trying to come up with some stuff and I know I'd like to take my staff here. And if you guys had something like that, that would be really helpful to us. So any idea you've got, write it down, because we need your feedback. And obviously you have a strong interest in this, or you wouldn't be here at this session. So if before you go, you do that, we would really appreciate it. And just on behalf of both Linda and I, we really do appreciate you taking the time to put Prime kind of into your vision, and put it into the work you're trying to do.